Of all the things in your life right now that are good, all the stuff that you have and your relationships and your gifts and abilities, all these things that you got, of all that, which one would be the most terrifying to lose if it was taken away? I mean, there are some things that you're willing to risk losing, right? You don't want to give them up. You don't want to lose them. But potentially, if you could potentially gain some greater benefit by trading for something else, then you'd consider it. You'd consider it. But there are other things that are just never on the table. You don't want to lose them. You guard those things, and if anything threatens them, you will take drastic action to hold on to them. It's because the thought of losing them is terrifying. You could refer to those things, whatever I just described in your life, you could refer to those things as your controlling fears. They're the fears that control your life because they determine your decision making, they determine your priorities. We all have normal fears and loves, and then we have controlling fears and controlling loves, right? That dictate our life. Your controlling love dictates what you run after in life, what you seek. Your controlling fears are the things that you're so afraid to lose that you will do anything to make sure that you do not lose them. And really those controlling loves, controlling fears, two sides of the same coin. They're the same thing. Your greatest fear is always losing your greatest love, right? Losing it or never getting it in the first place. So what are your controlling fears in your life? What are they? And in that list, whatever they are, where does the loss of intimacy with God rank? If you're anything like me, it ranks way lower than it should. I'll have access to closeness with God. I'll have intimacy available to me, and then some temptation comes along, and in a heartbeat, I'm willing to just sacrifice the availability of the closeness with God so that I can run after some sin. I'm not like that with other treasures. If something threatens my physical life, man, I panic. The car's spinning out of control, heading for the cliff. I'm in panic mode, and I'm doing everything I can to prevent loss of life. If something would threaten to take away my job or to take away all my money or my health, I would say, no, I don't want to risk losing those things. Those aren't on the table. But so often, some little sin comes along, and I'll just go right ahead and with that sin and forfeit nearness with God for a time, possibly a long time, just so that I can do this sin. The Bible calls that lack of the fear of the Lord. Lack of fear of God means it's when loss of God's favor and loss of nearness and intimacy with God isn't the controlling fear of your life. And that's the number one spiritual disease that we all struggle with. The lack of fear of God is our controlling fear, which is caused by the lack of love for God as our controlling love in life. So how can we change that? How can we move fear of God higher in our list of controlling fears? How can we increase our fear of God so that doing something that might jeopardize intimacy with God is just out of the question? How can we do it? How can we increase fear? Take a look down at verse 14. Ecclesiastes 3:14. God did this so that people would fear Him. Okay, so God's helping us out here. He did something to help us fear Him. What did He do that's going to help? Well, everything in between verses 1 and 14. So, let's take a look. Ecclesiastes 3:1. There is an occasion for everything, and a time for every activity under heaven. Now that word translated occasion, or your Bible might say time or season, that word refers to, it's a very specific word, it refers to an appointed time, a specific, set, designated appointment that someone intentionally scheduled. Okay, that's the meaning of that word. Now the word translated activity, or the ESV says matter, that word refers to, it's actually the word for delight. That which someone delights in or desires or decides or wills. It's connected to the will. It's always connected to the will. So we could translate verse 1 this way. There is an appointed, scheduled moment for everything and a time for every intended purpose under heaven. Folks, that verse is soaked with God. It's all about God. Even though the word God doesn't appear in the text, it's the whole thing's about God's intention and his purpose and his will and what he's doing, what he's deciding. So the preacher, the writer of the Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, what book are we in? Ecclesiastes. Sorry. He's so far in the book, chapters 1 and 2, he's given us a picture of life that almost seems kind of random, right? You read chapters 1 and 2 from the human standpoint, it almost sounds like God just sort of wound up this world like a clock, walked away, and now the laws of physics are just sort of running the place, and God's taking a hands-off approach, and something has gone haywire in the whole thing, just running amok. That's the feel you get in chapters 1 and 2. But if we think that way, we're as wrong as we can be. The preacher wants us to know that everything that ever happens because God appointed it to happen. Everything. That's the point of verse 1. And it's not enough for him to just tell us that. He really wants us to get it. So instead of just telling us, he's going to give us examples. 28 examples of what he means by that. 28 things that are appointed, scheduled in time, and they come in pairs. So you get 14 pairs. And it's very beautiful. A lot of you, this is one of your favorite passages, right? This is these 14 things. These lines aren't in the same dark, kind of depressing, almost depressing mood that we saw in chapters 1 and 2. There is a seriousness to them, but there's also a certain beauty to it. They've even found their way into American folk music song about it because they describe a certain rhythm of life and a movement back and forth from one aspect of life to its opposite in a way that's somewhat pleasing to read, and even though it does include some hard realities. In fact, it starts with the hardest reality of all, verse 2, there is a time to give birth and a time to die. It's two different seasons in life, right? Sometimes you're at the hospital welcoming a new member into your family and it's all smiles, and then later on that new member will be at the cemetery standing over your gravesite saying her last goodbyes and thinking about how to get along in life without you. And guess who schedules both dates? God. A couple might try to conceive, try for years. They're trying to get pregnant, and they can't. It doesn't happen. Finally give up. They pursue adoption. And then one day, she's pregnant. It's just God alone decides when a new life is going to come into the world. And God alone decides when that life is over. Ecclesiastes 8:8, no one has authority over the wind to restrain it, and there is no authority over the day of death. God alone determines your lifespan. Time to give birth, time to die. Verse 2, and a time to plant and a time to uproot. Two different seasons in life. There's some times in your life when what you need to do is put some seeds in the ground. You need to start something up. You try to make something grow. There's other seasons in life, other times when you need to get rid of something that's been growing. You need to chop down some trees. You need to get some things pulled up by the roots. The seasons of life change, right? It changes. That's the way life is. It's not like when you live life, you just pick the best activity and just do that all the time your whole life. That's not how life works. Times and seasons change, and new circumstances that come call for different activities. Verse 3, there's a time to kill and a time to heal. Sometimes you maybe need to kill an animal to feed your family or to protect your family. Or other times, you're putting all your time and energy not into killing, but into healing. You're trying to nurse something back to health. Prevent death. Verse 3, there's a time to tear down, and there's a time to build. There's a time to weep, there's a time to laugh. There's a time to mourn and a time to dance. There's a time to throw stones, a time to gather stones. There's a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to search and a time to count as lost. There's a time to keep, a time to throw away. There's a time to tear, there's a time to sow. There's a time to be silent, time to speak. There's a time to love and a time to hate. There's a time for war and there's a time for peace. What is the point of all that? Why all these times? What is the purpose of listing all these seasons? It could go a couple directions. I could preach a whole sermon just about how to be wise enough in life to discern the seasons of your life. How do you know whether it's time to do this or that? You know, how do you know? How do you decide when you should keep looking and when it's time to just give up and write it off? How do you know when it's time to keep something or when it's throw it away? How do you know when to speak up or shut up? That's one a lot of us get mixed up. I don't think that's the purpose of this passage. I don't think that would be the right way to go. He doesn't. The writer doesn't get to the end of the list and say, "Look, learn how to discern the seasons of your life." He doesn't say that. If you want to see what direction he's taking this, just read the next verse, verse 9. He says, "What does the worker gain from his struggles?" That word gain, remember that from chapter 1? That's that word that means, it refers to the struggle to gain advantage over providence, to gain control of life, to climb up on top of all the craziness of life, get out of the traffic jam of life. The preacher says, where does that effort get you? Given the reality that all the seasons of life are on God's calendar, they're scheduled, they're dictated by God's plan. Where is all your scrambling going to get you? You scramble and squirm to make things go a certain way, and then God just decides what's going to happen. So, whatever season of life you're in right now, who's in charge of that? And guess who's not in charge of that? God determines what happens. God determines the seasons of life, and we can make them worse by responding in a foolish way. We cannot gain control over the seasons of life. God schedules everything, and His schedule is beautiful. It's beautiful. Verse 11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. You say, everything? I mean, what about all the bad stuff? What about all the negative halves of all those couplets in that list? What about war and hating and giving up your search because you can't find the thing you're looking for? Or mourning or death? I mean, death? When it says He has made all things beautiful in their times, does that include death? Death is beautiful? Didn't Paul say death is an enemy in 1 Corinthians 15? Maybe when he says that He made everything beautiful in His time, maybe He's just referring to half of each, the good half of each one of those couplets, right? The loving and the embracing and the planting and the building and the giving birth. Or does everything here mean like everything? Well, the word everything in verse 11 has to mean whatever it meant in verse 1, the same word, right? Because in verse 1, go back to verse 1, he says there's an appointed moment for everything, right? Appointed moment for everything. And what do you mean by that? And then he gives an example. He gives this whole list, all these 28 things. And there's no question in verse 1, everything means everything in that list, right? All the items in the list. And the everything in verse 11 has to mean the same thing. So yes, God has even made death beautiful in its time. And that's the key. That last phrase is the key. The emphasis is on the beauty and the goodness of the timing of it. It's not so much that death itself is beautiful. Death is still an enemy. But it's that God's timing in bringing about that particular season of life, when He brings it about, is beautiful and perfect. But that doesn't always seem true, does it? Someone lives a long, fruitful life and dies, man, maybe that seems true. But if your child dies at age 9 on Christmas Day, nothing about that seems beautiful. Nothing about that timing seems beautiful. That seems like terrible timing. We call that a premature death, right? I mean, I listened to R.C. Sproul recently. He's talking about an insurance salesman who came and was selling him some life insurance. This guy was from the Presbyterian Ministers Fund. And at one point in his presentation, the salesman was explaining to Mrs. Sproul the benefit that she would get in the case of a premature death. And at that point, R.C. Sproul spoke up and said, "Wait a minute, I thought you said that you were here representing the Presbyterian Ministers Fund." He says, "I am." And Sproul says, "Oh, I didn't know Presbyterians believed in premature death." You know, which is... And if you're going to sell insurance to a guy like R.C. Sproul, you better be careful with the way you use words. Because Sproul's right. There's no premature death. There's no premature death. No premature anything. In this fallen, cursed world, death is a reality. It's a problem. It's an enemy. It's devastated. We long for the day when Christ will come and eliminate it forever. Amen? We're longing for that day. But for now, while it exists, the timing of it in our lives is orchestrated in a beautiful way by God. Including the death of a 9-year-old child? Yes. Yes. Say, but that doesn't seem true. I can't see that as beautiful. I can't see it. It does not look beautiful to me at all. It looks hideously ugly to me. And in my wildest imagination, I can't picture how it could be a good thing. I can't picture how this season of my life, I can't picture how losing my job right now could be good timing. It's terrible timing. It looks terrible. Someone once said life is like a tapestry that's a beautiful tapestry that's being woven on a loom. And life under the sun is like looking at that thing from the underside of the loom. And from the, if you look at something like that, needlepoint or something like that from the underside, it doesn't look beautiful at all, right? It just seems like a kind of a random mess of knots and snarls and, it doesn't look good. But from God's point of view, looking down from above, He's the only one that can see the beauty of the tapestry of the times. We can't see it. We can't see it. And the animals can't see it. But the difference is, they don't mind not seeing it. Right? Not seeing it, for us, not seeing it drives us crazy. Now, why is that? What is it inside us that insists on being able to see the meaning and beauty and goodness and coherence of all the things that take place? Why do we have to know that? Why are we so intent on knowing how it fits together and what it means? Well, it's because of the rest of verse 11. He has also put eternity in their hearts. What does it mean to have eternity in there, in your heart? What does that mean? And what should you do with it? It's in there. What should you do with it? I mean, what does that mean? What it means is you intuitively know that there's a top side to this tapestry. And you have a deep craving to see it, to enjoy it. It also means, having eternity in your heart means, the present just isn't enough for you. I mentioned this again last time about the animals. This sets us apart from the animals. Animals aren't concerned about eternity. They don't care about eternity. They don't care about the past or the future at all. They just exist in the present. That's all they care about. Do you think your hamster ever gets down and discouraged and depressed because he gets to thinking about the good old days when he used to just run that wheel twice as fast and now he's slowing down? No. Animals just exist in the present. No dog ever gets halfway through life and just realizes, man, I haven't accomplished what I thought I was going to accomplish in life, and gets into a midlife crisis. Doesn't happen to dogs, ever. That happens routinely, though, with people, doesn't it? Never with dogs. Every human can relate to the despair of chapters 1 and 2 of Ecclesiastes, right? We can all relate to it. Every one of us, we read that, and we see the futility of life, and we're like, yep, that, absolutely, I see that, I live that. Animals, no animal ever goes through that. Animals are designed by God to be fine, just existing just in the present, and they have no need to know anything about eternity or the future or anything like that, or the meaning of life. One question they never ask, the animals never ask, the one question they don't ever ask is the one question that we ask most of all, more than any other question. Animals do ask questions, not with language, but they have curiosity. There's things they want to know. Our dogs at home, if they hear a sound outside, somebody pulls up, they go racing to the door, and they get up and they look out, and they're craning their necks. They want to see. They want to find out something. They want to see if it's Tracy and the kids or if it's just a stranger. And they're very eager to know. They're asking the question, who? Right? Who's there? Who is this? They have that question. When they're sniffing at something, they're asking the question, what? What is this? Is this something I can eat or not? Right? Animals do have curiosity about some things, but the one question they don't ever ask is the question we ask more than any other question, that is, why? We want to know why. We're not content with just knowing what's happening. We want to know why it's happening. That is a uniquely human question, isn't it? And we ask it at two levels. We want to know why at the causation level and also the meaning level, right? We want to know what caused it and then what does it mean. For example, when you're walking down the street, imagine you're walking down the street and some bizarre thing happens. You're walking down, all of a sudden a grand piano crashes down on the sidewalk in front of you. And you're walking your dog. what happens? Your dog just walks around it, right? And what are you doing? You're looking up. Why? Why the difference? Because you got to know why. Why did this thing just fall on the sidewalk? What happened? What causes a piano to just fall from a building? We deal with that question 1,000 times a day. What caused this? You think how many times a day you are discerning cause and effect. And once you discover cause, you're still not done asking the question why, because now you want the deeper why. You want to know meaning, purpose. You discover, what caused it was a guy pushed it out the window. Well, I'm not done asking questions at this point. Why did you push it out the window? What was your purpose? What was your intention? Were you trying to kill me? Were you just trying to scare me? Or did it have nothing to do with me? It was just, you're just sick of the piano? What was it? Is it an accident on purpose? Meanwhile, your dog is just saying, can I eat this? And you're standing there, you're looking up, you're asking questions, you're doing all, your dog's like, let's get going, there's nothing to eat here, let's move on. What is it about us? What is it in us that makes us have to have no purpose and meaning? Why is it so important for us to understand sequence and of events and how events fit into a bigger picture with meaning? It's because God has planted eternity in our hearts. He made us eternal beings with eternal appetites that cannot be satisfied with just the present. We have an insatiable drive to look into the past, to look into the future, and to see how it fits. Verse 11, but, here's the problem. We've got this insatiable appetite, but man cannot discover the work God has done from beginning to end. We've got this insatiable drive for it, and we can't have it. We can't obtain it. No matter how much we study and figure and think and reason and research, we cannot figure it all out. God has made everything beautiful in its time, and that beauty is like the beauty of a giant mural. If you imagine some brilliant artist painting his mural on the side of a building, just massive, goes 10 blocks. Just this massive mural of one big picture, and you want to see this thing, but it's so huge you got to back up, and you back 2 steps, and it's in an alley, so you back a couple steps and bonk right into the other side of the building on the other side. And so now you can't get back far enough to take it all in. All you can see is this one little piece. That's the way life is for us. The problem is, you're an art lover. You got to see the big picture. You want to see the majesty of this big mural. But you can't. You can't back up enough to see it. All you can see is these little portions. And if you look at just one little portion of a big painting, it doesn't make any sense, right? You can't. If that's all you can see, it makes no sense. That's what life is like. God put eternity in our hearts. He made us art lovers. He made us want to see that whole picture. But the street's so narrow, we can never back up enough to see the whole thing. And all we can see is the little piece. And He's revealed some things to us, and what He has revealed, we can know and we can discover, but we can never know anything that He has not revealed. So what are we to do? You have eternity in your heart, but you're locked down in time. What are you supposed to do with that? Well, if you've already been with us in this study, you know part of the answer, verse 12. I know there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and to do good while they live. It is also the gift of God whenever anyone eats and drinks and enjoys his efforts. Enjoy your life. Enjoy walking down the alley alongside the big mural. Just enjoy what you can see. Stop running after what God hasn't revealed and just enjoy what He has revealed. You don't have to see the tapestry from the top to know that it's beautiful. All you have to do is trust the weaver. You don't have to see the mural to know that the little parts fit in. All you have to do is trust the painter. And if you're willing to do that, if you're willing to trust God with the circumstance of your life and how it all fits, you can enjoy life. He'll give you the gift of enjoyment. But the emphasis here isn't on so much that you should do that. The emphasis here is on the fact that when that happens, realize what's happening. Realize it's a gift from God. Every time you ever enjoy anything, realize this is a gift from God. Interpret enjoyment that way, as a gesture of God's love to you. The ability to enjoy something isn't always there, and you have no power to make it come when it's not there. So when it is there, receive it for what it is, a gift from God. You're going to be way better off in life if you stop trying to manufacture joy yourself by seizing control of life and understanding everything that God hasn't revealed. You stop that, and instead just trust God with all of that part, and just appreciate the gift of enjoyment when it comes. Trust God that this strange, weird piece does fit in beautifully to the overall mural. And just enjoy the little piece that you can see. But whatever you do, don't get your little paint set out and try to touch it up. You can't do that. See verse 14. I know that all God does will last forever, and there's no adding to it or taking from it. You can't touch it up. You can't change it. You can't. Now, can you make a difference in those areas of life where God has given you control? Sure. Absolutely. And you should do that. You got to do that. It's your responsibility. But guess who's in charge of which things are under your control and which things are not? It's God. And so even those things that are under your control aren't ultimately under your control, right? Everything's ultimately under God's control, and everything that ever happens at the moment that it happens because God put that on His calendar before the creation of the world. And He put it on His calendar at that moment because in the big picture, there's a beauty to that thing fitting in at that moment. Think of all the strange events in your life that just don't make sense. Just make no sense. Those are like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle that they can only fit in one spot, right? It's just a weird shape, and it doesn't make any sense by itself, and it only fits in one spot, but if it's placed there, and all the other pieces are placed where they belong, you get something beautiful. You get a beautiful picture, and that's the way life is. The only thing is, God hasn't shown us the box, the cover, right? He hasn't shown us the picture. We can't see the big picture, and we can't see the beauty of how the parts fit in many cases. It's out of our reach. Why? God, why? Why did you do it that way? Why put eternity in my heart? Why make me an art lover and then not let me see the mural? Why plant eternity in my heart and make it out of reach? Why do that? God, what's your reason for that? Reason? Verse 14. There's a so that in verse 14, so we're going to get the reason. God works, He does what He does, so that people will be in awe of Him. Literally, it's so that they would fear before His face. God did this to give us the thing that we were wanting at the beginning of the sermon. Remember the introduction of the sermon when I was describing fear? How do you move your fear of God up to a controlling fear in your life? How do you make that a bigger priority in your life? How do you increase that? Here's how. He's helping us out here. Here's how. Remember I said it's all, everything that happens between verses 1 and 14. That's the answer. We've got our answer now. Fearing God comes from this. Fearing God is a key concept in Scripture and especially in this book. It ends up being the bottom line of Ecclesiastes. He's going to bring it up. He brings it up here. He's going to bring it up again in chapter 5, again in chapter 7, again in chapter 8, and then again at the end of the book when he summarizes the whole thing, Ecclesiastes 12:13. Now that everything has been heard, the conclusion of the matter is, fear God and keep His commands. For this is all humanity, for God will bring every act into judgment. That's the bottom line. And it shouldn't come as any surprise to anyone that the bottom line is fearing God, because we read that in other wisdom literature. Both Psalms and Proverbs have statements saying that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Right? It's the beginning point of wisdom. That means nothing in life is wise unless it's governed by the fear of the Lord. So, what's the fear of the Lord? What does that mean? Well, for one thing, to fear God means to be afraid of His discipline. Just the basic, to be afraid of His discipline. Some translators want to reduce this word down to just awe or reverence or respect or something like that. But it's clear. It means fear. The passage I just read in chapter 12 is very clear. It's being afraid of what might happen to me on Judgment Day. It's real fear. Chapter 5, you see the same thing. Verses 6 and 7. Fear of God is a matter of being afraid of His anger. But how does all that fit in with what we saw in chapter 2 about intimacy and loving God and receiving gestures of His love and enjoying life, enjoying life in a way that increases our love for all that closeness with God? How do you reconcile that? Closeness, intimacy, love, fear, being afraid. I mean, how can you love someone you're afraid of? Those two, for some people, those are just two totally exclusive kinds of relationships, mutually exclusive kinds of relationships. They can't even fathom the concept of desiring to be near someone you're afraid of. It doesn't compute. And it may be, if you're like that, for people that are like that, it may be that something went wrong in their relationship with their earthly father that has confused their understanding. Because in a good, healthy father-child relationship, there's always a combination of fear and love. Always. A child takes his dad's displeasure very seriously, right? I mean, there's nothing he dreads more. That's scary. Dad being mad at me, that's scary. And nothing he dreads more, but at the same time, loves his father's embraces. And wants to be near his dad, wants to hug him, wants to wrestle with him, wants to be close to him. Fearing God is not in tension with loving God in any way. Right? There's no tension at all. They fit together hand in glove. They're perfectly compatible, because the more you love someone, the more terrifying the thought of jeopardizing closeness with that person. Right? Or being at odds with that person. It scares you. You don't want that. The greatest threat in life is always losing whatever you treasure most, isn't it? That's your controlling fear. And so if the sweetest, most valuable, most precious treasure in your life is closeness with God, then the biggest threat, the greatest fear in your life is losing that. That's a description of the good kind of fear of God. Now I need you to know there's also there's a wrong way to fear God. Anytime your fear of God causes you to move away from God, to retreat from God, recoil from God, that's the wrong way to fear God. That's a bad kind of fear. The good kind makes you shy away from sin so that you can draw near to God. The bad kind makes you shy away from God himself. And I can illustrate this in Exodus 20. In Exodus chapter 20, both the good kind and the bad kind are described. We've talked about this before. Exodus 20:18. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain and smoke, they trembled with fear. And they stayed at a distance. What kind of fear is that? That's the bad kind, right? They're staying at a distance. They're shying away from God's presence. Verse 19, and they said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we'll listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. He said, no, that's the wrong kind of fear. You don't want to hear from God. You don't want to be near God. That's the wrong kind of fear. Don't have that kind of fear. And then Moses goes on, verse 20, God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. See, now that's the good kind of fear. The bad kind makes you recoil from God. The good kind makes you recoil from sin so that you can draw near to God. That's the background behind the concept of fearing God. That's what the idea means. And in Ecclesiastes, the term fear God is used almost as shorthand to just describe a believer. This is the life of a believer. So, in the wisdom literature, you have the wicked and the righteous. In this book, you've got the wicked and the God-fearers. The same thing, the righteous God-fearers. Now, I'll give you an example. Ecclesiastes 8:12. It will go well with those who fear God, who fear before his face. However, it will not go well with the wicked, and they will not lengthen their days like a shadow, for they do not fear God. See? So when he says that the bottom line is you should fear God, basically what he's saying is the bottom line is you should become converted. You should get saved. You should become a believer. And if you're already saved, the bottom line is you should live like a believer, because the way believers live is they fear God. So it's actually very similar to Acts 17, just a real close connection. It just occurred to me the other day how close this is. Acts 17:24, Paul said this. He said, the God who made the world and everything in it, he is the Lord of heaven and earth. Verse 26, from one man he made every nationality to live over the whole earth, and listen, has determined their appointed times. That sound familiar? He's determined their appointed times and the boundaries where they live. And he did this. Why did he do this? Why the appointed times? So that they might seek God and perhaps they might reach out and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. God has determined appointed times and places of life in order to cause people to seek him and to reach out for him so they might be saved. It's the same idea. So, let's talk about how it works. How does the invisible beauty of all the appointed times, combined with us having eternity planted in our hearts, how do those two ingredients combine to create fear of God? Because that's not really obvious immediately, right, how that works. So the first answer, I think, that comes is that makes us fear him because it reminds us that he's in total control, he alone is in total control of our well-being. There's a time to laugh and a time to mourn, right? There's time for laughing, there's time for tears. And it's totally up to God which one of those seasons is about to hit in your life tomorrow. Does that make you fear God? You know, He's in control. He alone ultimately decides if you will be laughing or happy, or if you will be tomorrow on the floor sobbing with heaves of agony that feel unbearable. And you become suicidal. He decides it. He decides if it's going to be a time of embracing, or if you're going to go through a time of no embracing. See, if the stuff in your life that matters most, all the stuff that matters to you, is in His hands, then guess what? He matters to you. Which is basically a definition for fearing God. Fearing God is when He matters to you. That's what it means. His opinion of you matters more to you than people's opinion of you. That's fearing God. If people's opinion matters more, then that's fearing man. If closeness with Him matters more to you than any other goal in life, that's fearing God. Avoiding His displeasure matters more to you than anything you could gain apart from Him, that's fearing God. And His threats of judgment matter to you more than any other threat, that's fearing God. Fearing God is when God matters to you. And so, in order to bring you to fear Him, help you learn how to fear Him, help you learn how to make it so everything that He matters to you, God, the way He does that is by taking everything else that matters to you in life and showing you that He's in complete control of that. So, you know, like if you imagine our country got to the point where we had socialized groceries. So the only way you could ever get any food is if it was dispensed to you by some government official. That was life. Suddenly that official matters to you, right? You don't want to be at odds with that guy. Otherwise you don't get any food. You definitely don't want him against you. God is not only in charge of all your food, He's in charge of everything you need. Everything you want. Everything. So you don't want to be at odds with Him. He's in control of everything. And that wouldn't affect us very much if all we cared about was the present. If we didn't have eternity in our hearts, and all we ever thought about was right now, then we would be just like the animals, and the future wouldn't really mean anything to us. But we do understand past and future and eternity and causation and meaning and purpose. And so the one in charge of all that matters to us. If we think. We understand there is a future and that we're going somewhere. We're moving through life, but we're flying blind. We can't see out the windshield. What does that mean? It means you better fear the one who's driving. The only one that can see out the windshield. The only one who can see what's coming. The animals, they're in the car, but they don't realize it's moving. So they don't care if they see out the windshield, but God put eternity in our hearts. We know there's a future, and so that makes us care about who's driving. And we don't want to be at odds with the one who's driving. So how do you make this work? How do you make the seasons of your life cause more fear of God in your heart? How do you do it? Well, first, by realizing that God controls those seasons so that you don't want to be at odds with Him, the principle I just described. And then second, by realizing that not only does He control the seasons, but He controls your ability to enjoy the seasons. Remember that part? So this season that just blew into your life, last month, last week, last night, tomorrow, whatever, some new season breaks into your life, what should your first reaction be? First reaction should be, wow, my only shot at enjoying this season is if God grants me enjoyment of it. I better fear Him. I better live in fear of Him. I don't want to be at odds with Him. See that? Because He only grants that gift of enjoyment to people who please Him. So I'm afraid of not pleasing Him. So the reason God is doing it this way is so that man would fear Him. They'd see that He's in charge, and they'd say, well, I got to be on good terms with Him. That's His purpose for all the seasons and times of life. So, why isn't it working more? Why doesn't everybody fear Him? Everybody's going through seasons of life, right? Why doesn't everybody fear Him? Most people don't fear God. The answer is, The heart of man, naturally, has such a strong aversion to fearing God that he will do anything in his power to suppress any truth that points towards telling me I must fear God. They'll just suppress that. That's why they're so militant in their doctrines of evolution. They're just relentless. You turn in any documentary on anything, or go into any science class, wherever you go, they're just relentless in cramming the doctrines of evolution down everybody's throat, and naturalism down everybody's throat, even when it has nothing to do. Sometimes you see a documentary that has nothing to do with that, and they got to squeeze it in somehow. They got to bring it up. Why? Why is it so incredibly important to them? Why can't they just be content to believe it themselves without cramming it down everyone's throat? The reason is because everywhere you look in the world, no matter where you look, there's all this evidence pointing to this one fact: God matters. Anyone that doesn't take God into consideration is a fool. All the evidence is pointing in that direction. You're a fool not to fear God. And they can't stand that conclusion. And so they've got to try to wipe out every trace of it. They got to suppress this evidence that God planted eternity in their hearts, and they're just doing everything they can to rip it out of their hearts. They don't want it. They don't want it there. No eternity. No meaning. No purpose. No design. The times are not appointed. They're not planned. They can't be. It's just all one big, giant accident of nature, and everything that happens is just caused by random, meaningless, purposeless events. That's what they want to believe. But no matter how hard, no matter how many times they tell themselves all that, they just can't help living life as if there's meaning and purpose. They can't help it. You look at any atheist, any naturalist, he's acting like there's meaning and purpose. Just by getting out of bed. And he can't help it. And so he's got to explain that. And so they come up with these ridiculous ideas like, well, there's some meaning, but the only meaning to the universe is the meaning that you assign to it. You create the meaning. Talk about absurdity. I'm going to give meaning to the universe? According to your theory, the universe is this big, giant natural accident, and I'm part of the accident, right? How am I going to assign meaning to the accident that I'm a part of? In fact, not only am I a part of it, I'm one of the tiniest, most temporary parts of it. And I'm going to create meaning for it all? That's insanity. It makes no sense. But they got to embrace insanity, because the only other alternative is that there's a God who's out there, who controls my well-being, and he's in charge of my enjoyment, and I'm answerable to him on Judgment Day, which means I got to live for his pleasure rather than my own agenda, and they would rather embrace insanity than accept that. What the preacher has given us here in this book is a radically different approach to the seasons of life. When things happen in your life, instead of trying to get your arms around it, instead of trying to gain control of it, figure it all out, fear God. And instead of saying, I gotta find a way to just get some control, I gotta get a handle on this, I gotta get my arms around this somehow. Instead of that, just forget about your arms. Get your knees bent before the God who has his arms around it. That's the message. Now, I'm not saying you just do nothing. I'm not saying that. If there's something that's your responsibility, it's your responsibility. You need to take care of it. You need to work hard. I'm not saying don't do anything. What I am saying is, no matter what comes into your life, your first priority is always to ask, am I living in fear of God? I've got to be, am I pleasing God? God brought this season into my life for a purpose, and the purpose is so that I would fear him. So is it working? Am I resisting that purpose, or am I cooperating with that purpose? Is this thing making God matter to me more? If the season in your life right now is not making God matter to you more, it's a malfunction. It's not working. That's not what God's design. His design is for it to increase fear, for God to matter more to you, for you to prize closeness with God more than anything else. That's the reason for the season in your life. It should make you afraid to do anything that would jeopardize intimacy. You can't afford to jeopardize intimacy in this season, whatever the season is. That's the point. So, what time is it? in your life? What time do you got? I mean, what season are you in right now in your life? Are you young, maybe newly married, starting a family? Or are you planning a funeral? Whichever it is, fear God. Say, wow, God appointed this new season for me. Am I living in fear of Him? Is this a season of planting for you? You're planting seeds. You're starting things. You're building things. It's time to build. It's time to begin some stuff. That's you? Fear God. Or is it a time of tearing down? You have some things in your life that need to be pulled up by the roots, and you got to start some things out. Fear God. Fear the God that appointed this season for this time. Stand in awe of the one who put that on the calendar for such a time as this in your life. What good is going to come from all this planting or all this uprooting, all this work you're doing, this tearing down, whatever it is? What good is going to come if God doesn't bless it? So, fear God. Is this a time of joy, dancing, rejoicing, laughing? Great. Fear God. Or is it a time of grieving and mourning and tears and groaning? Fear God. If it's a time to laugh in your life, you should make God matter to you more than anything else, because He's the one that's in charge of what's right around the corner. And that laughing isn't going to go forever. And if it's a time to weep in your life, then that should make God matter to you more than anything else. If it's a time to laugh, laugh. Laugh it up. Great. Do it. But don't make that your hope, because another season is coming. And if it's time to weep, weep. Weep hard. But don't despair. Don't give in to despair. Don't give up hope. Realize that an almighty, wise God has brought this hard, painful time into your life right now on purpose for a good reason. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And remind yourself that these tears can't hurt you. They can't hurt you. This trial can't crush you. This hardship doesn't even have the power to take away your joy. But the displeasure of God could crush you to powder. So, don't be afraid of the trial, but fear God. Is it a time to embrace in your life? Just relationships are good, things are close, there's embracing. Fear God. Is it a time to give up the search? You've been looking. It's not worth the search anymore. I'm just going to give up. I'm going to cut my losses. Fear God. Are you tearing something apart, or are you trying to repair something? Are you dealing with things right now that you love, or are you dealing with things right now that you hate? Are you at war? Are you at peace? Fear God. We're living on a bridge that spans the gap between two realities. On the one hand, we're stuck in time. We're locked down in time, subject to the futility of a cursed world. But at the same time, on the other hand, we have eternity planted in our hearts, and we long for meaning and understanding and beauty. So what should we do? What should we do on the bridge between these two realities? How do we deal with the dual realities of living in a fallen, cursed world and at the same time having this insatiable thirst for eternity in our hearts? Well, there's two things. You get by in the cursed, futile world by trusting God with what isn't revealed and just enjoying what He has given, whatever He's given, through the gift of enjoyment and trusting Him. And then you satisfy, on the other side, you satisfy your craving for eternity by fearing God. Let's pray. Lord, everyone here is in a different season. And I don't know what all seasons people brought in here with them today. But I know there are no doubt many struggling. Why, God? Why this? And why now? Lord, let us not base our joy on figuring out the answer to that question beyond this answer. It's so that you will fear Him. Teach us to live in fear of you for your glory. For we pray this in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. All right.